Hello guys, this is an interesting paper that was published in Nature Communication in 2019. The name of this paper is A Critique of Pure Learning and What Artificial Neural Network Can Learn from Animal Brains by Anthony Zador. The link to this publication is provided in the description below. This paper presents arguments regarding how to learn from the inner workings of the animal brain in order to advance the field of learning in the artificial neural networks. The artificial neural networks were invented in an attempt to build artificial systems based on computational principles used by the nervous system, such as many simple units connected by synapses operating in parallel. Now, the question might arise that do we really need to study the animal brain for progressing the AI? Let's look at an example in nature. We know that the birds are really good at flying. But we have invented airplanes that can fly much better at greater altitude for longer distance. So, just as the airplanes are very different from birds, so we could imagine that an intelligent machine would operate by very different principles from those of a biological organisms. But the paper argues that we still need to look into animal brain for progressing AI. In the previous example, even though an airplane is better by some measure, but a bird was not designed to fly faster or fly at a higher altitude. And the task that the birds are really good at, planes cannot do that, like swooping silently from a tree to catch a mouse. So an intelligent machine, which is sometimes misleadingly called an artificial general intelligence, is not general at all. It is highly constrained to match human capacities so tightly that only a machine structured similar to a brain can achieve it. So, if we want to design a system that can do what we can do, we will need to build it according to the same design principles. Hence, we need to look into the inner workings of the animal brain. Now, let's look into how learning in the artificial neural networks work. Here, learning refers to the process of extracting structure from input data, which is encoded into the parameters of the network. And there are basically three classical paradigms for extracting the structure from the data. The first one is the supervised learning, where the data consists of pairs of input and its label, and the goal is to find network parameters that generate the correct label for the novel pairs. The second one is the unsupervised learning, where the data have no labels, and the goal is to discover statistical regularities in the data without explicit guidance about what kind of regularities we are looking for. And lastly, it's reinforcement learning, where data are used to drive action, and the success of those actions is evaluated based on the reward signal. Now let's look at how animals learn. The most important question here is, how do animals function so well soon after the birth, even with the lack of massive supervised training datasets? For example, a squirrel can jump from tree to tree within the months of birth. A colt can walk within hours after birth. The answer to such question is that these animal behaviors are already present at birth and are inherited from previous generations. These are known as innate behaviors. And these innate mechanisms are encoded in the genome, and this genome encodes the blueprint for wiring of their nervous system. In simple organisms like worms, genomes have the capacity to specify every connection between every neuron to the minute details, whereas in larger brains such as those of mammals, synaptic connections cannot be specified so precisely, as genomes simply does not have the sufficient capacity to specify every connection explicitly. So instead, genomes specify a set of rules for wiring up the brain during the development. This is known as the genomic bottleneck, as the genome cannot specify the explicit wiring diagram in most brains. But one observation is that these innate behaviors are only useful if the environment does not change, which is usually not the case. So, when the environment is changing, the animals need both innate and learned behaviors, where the learned behaviors help the animals to adapt to an environment, and these innate behaviors arise through evolution by natural selection. Thus, the evolution, like learning, can be viewed as a mechanism for extracting statistical regularities on a much longer time scale. So, the learning in animals can be summarized by considering two nested optimization processes: an outer evolution loop acting on a generational timescale and an inner learning loop which acts on the lifetime of a single individual. Now, what are the implications for the artificial neural networks? The first observation that much of the animal behavior is innate and does not arise from learning suggests that artificial neural networks solving a new problem should attempt to build on the solutions to previous related problems. And the second observation that the genome doesn't encode representation or behaviors directly or optimization principles directly, but encodes wiring, rules, and patterns, which then instantiate the behaviors and representation. It is these wiring rules that are the target of the evolution. This suggests that wiring topology and network architecture should be the target for optimization in the artificial systems. In conclusion, I would like to say that this paper gives a very interesting argument regarding how the current generation of neural network can benefit from the findings of the research conducted on the animal brain, and I hope to see some interesting papers in this direction in the future. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, remember to keep trying.